Nerd and Normie Podcast. I'm a big film nerd, Everett.
And I'm Emerald, and I'm dating a nerd.
All right, on this week's episode, we have the brand new Marvel movie, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, directed by James Gunn.
And Watcher, directed by Chloe Okuno.
For both of these movies, we are going to start with no spoilers, and then we will jump into spoilers. We will be putting time codes down in the description so you can jump around. Enjoy.
Came back a total dick.
Oh, please. He left out some important information, but that is the gist of it.
Alright, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, as said, was directed by James Gunn. Stars Chris Pratt, Zoe Saldana, Dave Bautista, Karen Gillan, Palm Clemente, Vin Diesel, and Bradley Cooper as the titular Guardians of the Galaxy, as well as a host of other characters appearing, including very strong performances by Chukwudi Iwuji and Will Poulter. For starters, this is obviously the latest entry in Marvel, which has been a bit hit or miss recently. I did not end up seeing Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Didn't quite appeal to me, and that seemed to be the right call, as not many people seem to enjoy that one. Going back a bit further, I have seen pretty much every other Marvel movie, and
I think the last one we watched was the most recent Thor, right?
In theaters, yeah.
Yeah.
I try and keep up with them. I'll catch them when they come to Disney Plus and stuff. I've watched the TV shows. But ever since Endgame, Marvel has been really hit or miss for me. I used to really enjoy these movies, and I would generally say most of them were coming in at 7s or 8s out of 10, if not higher. It was very rare for them to have a misstep. The past few years, it's been much more 5s, 6s, maybe even worse. But I can happily say, despite not being the biggest fan of the Guardians movies or their characters in appearances elsewhere in the MCU, I actually enjoyed this one. I thought it was a more or less a return to form for Marvel. It was more in line with what I would expect them to be putting out on a regular basis.
Yeah, I thought it was okay. I'm just not really a huge Marvel person in general, so my expectations were really low, and it was better than what I expected, but it wasn't something I would seek out to watch, I would say.
Yeah, I think the best parts of this film are easily Dave Bautista and Palm Clemente as Drax and Mantis. I think continuing their strong performances in every appearance they've had, they steal the show. Their dynamic is just really, really great. I think Karen Gillan does very well. Zoe Saldana's there. I don't really know that she has anything to stand out noteworthy. And then as with Mario, both of us don't really like Chris Pratt, so he's there, and he was
fine.
being a weird man and being inappropriate, and just, I think with the rest of the cast being so enjoyable, it is really a shame. And it's not even just that it's Chris Pratt in the lead role, it's the character. In every appearance he's had, he's the worst part of the movie for me, just in terms of, like, he says icky things, or he's mean, or he's gross, or he's dumb, or like in Infinity War, he's literally the reason half the universe gets snapped because he loses his temper because he's a little baby man. And I get that that's his character. I'm just saying that shouldn't be his character, and I wish it was different.
Yeah, me and Everett talk about this a lot, where it seems as though, especially in TV shows, but sometimes in like movies or series or whatever, they purposely make the main character unlikable. Or maybe not purposely, but the main character like never has any progress in their character, no growth or development, and they're just the worst one. And all the side characters are so likable.
Yeah, it's like, oh, we can make them say all these snarky, mean comments or do something inappropriate. For instance, he basically has 30 seconds where he betrays his entire character romantically for a joke punchline, and I'm just like, why are we here? Why are we doing this? It's weird and doesn't make any sense, but it's kind of a laugh for some people in the audience. And I just feel like there's a lot of characters out there where they do this with their lead and then surround them with really likable people, but they don't make them grow. And so, I don't know, it just leaves me a little disappointed.
It's the Victorious effect from that Nickelodeon show where Victoria Justice's character was just so awful, and everyone else was like, has gone on to be huge actors and amazing characters.
Yeah.
This one also, this movie, was a lot darker than a lot of the other Marvel movies, including the ones where they snap away the entire world. Like, it was very upsettingly dark, I would say. Like, it was still enjoyable as like a movie, but like in some parts of it, it made my tummy sick. Like, it was
Yeah, it's like if you took the moment where, like, let's use Infinity War again as an example. There's like 2 moments in that where I've always been like, whoa, that was like heavy for Marvel, and that's the snapping of Loki's neck brutally on camera, and then also the like death scene throwing off over the mountain to get the Infinity Stone, and how sad that is and stuff, and just like, wow, I didn't know Marvel was willing to go that dark and violent on screen. Take that, and instead of being about 10 minutes of the total runtime, make it about 30 to 40 minutes of the total runtime.
maybe even more. It was like a very big, it was like the main plot was
it's the main focus of the film, and there is direct violence or upsetting imagery on screen for large portions of this film.
Yeah, it was rough.
And I get that, like, that's kind of James Gunn's thing, especially with his work with DC. They really let him do that with Suicide Squad and the Peacemaker show. And I think they're like, oh, well, you know, those were very well liked. We'll let him do more than we normally would. But I think it also really creates a tonal issue in this movie, in that 1 minute I'm supposed to be like laughing, haha, they're being so goofy and silly with like Drax and Mantis, and then 10 seconds later I'm supposed to be like sad and crying about this horrible backstory and terrible imagery.
Yeah, and I would also say a lot of people who are like very big Marvel fans are very much into the rewatchability of all of these, and watching this about like seeing how a certain character came to be and what horrible things had to happen to get them to where they are. Rewatching these now, I would be like, oh my god, the whole time watching it, like, that's so sad that he has to act this way and be funny this way and whatever, given what happened.
Yeah, it definitely strikes a heavier tone, for better or for worse. I think some people really, really enjoy that, but I think there's also 2 things to consider here. One, it kind of comes out of context of the rest of the MCU and doesn't really fit their vibe usually. But the other big thing for me is the poor parents who liked the last few Marvel movies and their kid just wants to see Drax be goofy or whatever, and brings them to the Marvel movie going, yeah, it's PG-13, but it's Marvel, like, they don't do anything too bad. And the man literally gets his face ripped off, and you see under his skin, and there's mutilated animals and animal torture, and they drop the F-bomb. Like, it's much more adult than most MCU movies.
Yeah, it was pretty rough. This movie also, I think, has the best Marvel villain, for me at least. Like, obviously, in other Marvel movies, like, the villains are really big and funny and theatrical and wild and stuff, but this one, like, made my skin crawl a bit. Like, the parts that were theatrical and overplayed were still, like, scary. Like, he was very well played.
Yeah, the actor's name is Chukwudi Iwuji. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He is fantastic in this movie. He really gives, like, a star-making performance for him. I hope he gets to go on and do more stuff. He hits the high, expressive, screaming moments without them feeling fake, and he has the calm, sinister moments that work just as well. And I was telling Emerald, I think part of what really helps him is most Marvel villains go one of 2 ways. They're just a guy who happens to get the same powers as the villain, or they're some crazy CGI fest thing, and he's neither. You know, he's slightly mutilated man with hundreds of years of life and experience in pursuit of this one goal, so he has earned the kind of crazy theatricality, but he also just has a face with some prosthetics around the edge, and so it just allows the actor to really bring that performance through. And so he's not unbelievable or weird to look at. You just kind of settle into the way he looks and his outfits and stuff. And he just brings a real menace to the character in a really great way. It is definitely one of the best Marvel villains of all time for me.
Yeah, he was incredible. And it's also like, I wouldn't say a believable villain given the storyline, but like the way he plays it makes the storyline believable. Like he's incredible to watch. He's great.
Yeah. And I think another great thing about this villain, as I said earlier, a lot of Marvel villains are just the character, but with evil intention, main character with evil intention. And so you get a lot of just same person fighting same person, and it's lots of just fist fights or guns shooting and lasers and jumping around and whatever. Whereas this one really, his skill set does not match at all with the Guardians, and their way of normally fighting a villain doesn't work at all in this scenario. And so they're forced to make decisions and come up with solutions and do stuff cleverly to get out of situations, which is really refreshing and really nice. That being said, there are a lot of moments in this film where I felt like it was really clever and well written and put them in challenging situations, and they had to be smart to get out of them. And then the other half of the movie is just like, oh no, we got him in a weird spot. Will Poulter, you stumble into scene. Or just like, oh, how do we make this slightly funnier because it's getting serious? Will Poulter, come on in, buddy.
Yeah, he didn't really have a place in this movie. Like, and
nothing against Will Poulter.
He played what he played
Yeah.
great. He's funny, he's cute, he's charming. He's that character, and I think he would have been great had they brought that character in a different movie. But like in this one, he just seemed out of place and odd.
And I'm trying to remember, because again, I've fallen a little bit off the MCU of where I know I've seen him before and stuff, but like where he quite lines up. And I wonder if it's James Gunn introduced him and wants to keep using him and really just likes working with him, and he's funny and entertaining and good on set and whatever. Or if it's like Marvel was like, hey, we teased this character, we gotta keep using him so he fits in your world, and it's, you know, easy enough to make him a part of this story. And yeah, like the whole, if you know the High Evolutionary and who he's created and all that kind of stuff, it makes sense that Will Poulter is here and somewhat a part of this story. But outside of like him being mentioned or immediately choosing one side or the other, and just kind of being more of a bit part player in this film, he has a weird amount of screen time, but also weirdly just not enough screen time to really develop as a character.
Yeah, it's literally like he appears, he's gone for 30 minutes. He appears, he's gone for 10 minutes. He literally is stumbling into every scene he's in for 2 seconds and then is gone.
And unlike Sean Gunn's character as Kraglin, I don't have as much established history with him or his involvement with these characters for him to just kind of play a smaller backseat role and just show up from time to time when needed and when called upon. Because it makes sense for him to show up when they go, oh, hey, guy that we left here who's like kind of part of our team, we're going to call you and you're going to come. And so then when they call him and he comes, it's like, yeah, that makes sense. But Will Poulter's just kind of out there.
Yeah, it was the same. Well, I guess Cosmo the dog is also a part of their team or whatever, but they also had a weird amount of screen time where I couldn't decide if I liked the character or not.
All right, that concludes our non-spoiler thoughts on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. If you do not want to hear spoilers for this movie, please skip ahead now and you can hear our thoughts on Watcher. All right, now for a spoiler review of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Again, this is spoilers. I think first thing I want to talk about, there are a few moments in this movie that really just feel like fan service because this is the final James Gunn one. And none lands worse for me, and I'm sure there are fans out there who absolutely love this, but Groot saying I love you instead of just saying I am Groot. So dumb, so out of nowhere.
And just weird.
So weird. There's this whole like subplot throughout the thing that Gamora can no longer understand Groot when he just says, I am Groot. And then at the end, she finally does understand him. And then he changes to speaking English. I think there could have been something where he's trying to get her back to the team. And so he's struggling to try and say something other than I am Groot, and finally squeaks out an I love you in English. And then, it's a really nice moment for them. But because he's never even once seemed to care about speaking English.
Or try. And just always says, I am Groot for 3 movies plus all his other appearances. It just felt out of nowhere. And like, they were like, oh, well, we haven't done it yet. And this is our last chance with James Gunn at the helm to do it. And if we have another director have him say stuff in English, the fans will be up in arms because it's not James Gunn and we're betraying the character or whatever. So I don't know if they intend to have him speaking more English going forward or what, but it was just so dumb. Yeah. And I will say the biggest spoiler in this movie is that my favorite character is Rocket Raccoon out of the Guardians, and he's barely in it. He's the main story of it.
He's a plot device in this movie.
Yeah.
He's not a character.
And it kind of just takes away a lot for me, just because, I find that's the only reason for me that Groot is even a character, is because of his relationship with Rocket. And Rocket's dynamic with everyone, I feel like, brings the most comedic points as well as the most emotional points, because he's so funny that when he does have an emotional one, it's way more emotional. And so, I don't know, having him be basically unconscious 90% of the film, besides in flashbacks, was a little rough, but...
Yeah, and those flashbacks are a part of what we were really talking about in non-spoilers of the really brutal parts. There is the High Evolutionary is taking creatures and trying to perfect them, and so he's created a bunny with spider legs, mechanical spider legs, and a metal jaw, a walrus that's a wheelchair with its eyes pried open, and a sea otter with mechanical arms, and then Rocket with just some minor upgrades. Yeah.
It's basically that he gave him the ability to be higher thinking, higher intelligence, can talk, and human-esque qualities.
Yeah. And so in these flashbacks, we're supposed to be getting attached to these characters and seeing some of the dark experiments the High Evolutionary is performing and stuff on other creatures, and Rocket inadvertently kind of helps him perfect his design or whatever he thinks. But
it's
also,
so clearly leading to them dying.
We have never seen them again. They're not part of the MCU now. They're not a future character. And it's very clear that they are being set up to die. The number of times they say, we're friends. Oh my God.
It's so nice having
friends. I can't wait to see the sky when we get out of here. And it's literally, that tone of voice is not us pretending. That is how the characters sound constantly. And it's just, let's name each other. We're not just numbers. And then obviously they're all going to die. And so I did not get attached. I did not let myself be vulnerable to that or whatever. And also, they're really creepy to look at. And so I know some people are like, oh, but it's so cute or so tragic and whatever. But I was just like, it's off-putting. I'm uncomfortable. And I know that they're all going to die. So why am I here?
The part where they actually do die and the villain shoots them, he's like, what did you think was going to happen? And I'm like, exactly. What did you think was going to happen here? Obviously, he's going to kill them.
Yeah. And so I think it was just very heavy-handed. And I don't know if it was because they're like, oh, we haven't done much of this before and we want to really make sure people care about these characters and they just went too far, or if they just didn't really have a handle on the scenario as a whole. But yeah.
But they hit every single cliche that you could hit on having a cute character, I say in quotations, die. And then they have even the stupid weird heaven thing where Rocket's about to die and he sees them in heaven and they're like, of course you can join us when you die, we love you, we've been waiting for you, but it's not your time yet. And then he wakes up. Stupid.
Yeah. And to continue on that thought specifically, they're like, but it's not your time yet, so go back and be alive. And so he finally wakes up, and we spent the whole movie trying to revive real life Rocket, and then the Guardians just disband, not because any of them die or something happens or Rocket wants them to or whatever. They're just like, nah, I think I'm done for a bit. I'm just gonna go relax. And so then poor Rocket is like, oh, cool, I'm finally awake and ready to be emotionally vulnerable with my friends. Oh, no, you're all leaving me.
Yeah.
And then it's over.
And, like, obviously it has to happen because, like, the characters and the actors don't want to be in it as much or whatever. And this was, I thought, supposed to be the ending of this trilogy because they said it was a trilogy. And then you sit through, like, the friggin' 10-minute end credits just for it to show Chris Pratt's character eating cereal and then being like, Star-Lord will return. And it's like,
it undercut any emotion from the movie of feeling like, oh, these characters have finally disbanded and this is final or whatever. And it's like, nah, he's gonna be back, and every other character is alive and set up in a position where we can very easily just be like, oh, okay, hey, let's call up Karen Gillan. Oh, hey, let's call up Drax for any time that they have an extra $5 million in the budget lying around and want to bring one of these characters in.
Yeah.
And and I'm not saying they all had to die or anything.
But at least one of them, maybe.
Maybe one of them for some emotion or whatever. Or just, like, make it feel final. Like, maybe they don't die, but they're clearly retiring. Or, you know, if you're really like, we got to keep the door open, you can Red Skull it and send them off to some random part of the universe where they're locked off from everything else or whatever, or create some sort of like Brie Larson's Captain Marvel scenario where it's like, oh, she's off doing more important stuff, so that's why she didn't show up in this movie. You could have them, because they create the kids that they save at the end, like they have to help them, whatever, just make that a bigger deal. And you can keep them separate. But yeah, it to me feels like, oh no, we're not ready to get rid of these characters because they know this one is going to do the best of their recent movies and that it's going to be probably the best received, and so they're not willing to commit. And it's classic Marvel, they never truly kill off characters.
Yeah, which is kind of the thing we were saying with, like, 50% of the writing was so good and 50% was just pointless. Like, the storyline in general, I did find very interesting. I thought it was, you know, an interesting direction for Marvel to take. Yeah, the villain was incredible, and, you know, the action was fine. It was okay, but
there were some good sequences. There were some really rough early 2000s Jason Bourne looking things, especially, we've kind of talked about this weirdly a couple times already on this podcast, but all the main characters ganging up on the villain to beat them up has been done a lot this year and done pretty well this year. Not in this one. I did not know who was in the room. I did not know what direction they were going or someone was going to be coming from. It was very just quick cut, random flash of an arm swinging across the screen. No context, no ability to follow the action.
Yeah, comparing this to the Dungeons and Dragons one is crazy, because that one was done so well in one of our favorite scenes in the movie. Compared to this one, it was just like, okay, you know. But like, yeah, the storyline was pretty good, and like a lot of it was funny. Any of the scenes with Mantis and Drax were very funny because they have a great dynamic. I like Karen Gillan, what's her character's name again?
Nebula.
Yeah, I like Nebula's character arc throughout all the movies and how she's, like, allowing herself to be fun again. And, you know, I did like a large majority of it, but certain scenes and certain writing just ruined the majority of the film for me.
Yeah, and I think, speaking of Nebula, that was one of the moments that I kind of talked about in non-spoilers. The whole movie, the entire time, Star-Lord is just trying and failing and being a little overbearing, kind of too pushy towards Gamora. And at one point, she's like, well, maybe you're in love with the wrong sister or whatever. And then he, like, looks at Nebula and he's like, maybe I am. And it's just like, dude, like, we've been building to this whole thing with you and Gamora to the point where we literally, like, are supposed to accept that you almost destroyed the entire universe over the fact that you couldn't be with Gamora. And then just because Nebula's there and has pretty black eyes, as he says, you're going to just like pretend that you're supposed to be with her. And I get that it's supposed to be for a joke, but it's one of those jokes that just betrays the characters, and so it feels very much like it was written for the comedy and not as a result of the scene. It's just like, oh, we want to do this because it would be funny.
Yeah. There's a character played by Nathan Fillion that I think would have been just such a pointless random character with no relation to the story, shouldn't have been in it at all, but the fact that it was played by Nathan Fillion made it like my favorite character. I think he was so funny. I don't know,
yeah, he had a kind of fun dynamic where he has somebody working under him who's just kind of like a nepotism baby or something and really incompetent at everything, or at least Nathan Fillion thinks he's really incompetent. And so like Star-Lord's trying to like get out of a situation and is saying something to the effect of, oh, well, I got stuck with, the boss's nephew, and so you know how that can be. And he's like, oh, yeah, I've been there. And then, like, the main villains show up or whatever, and there's something happens again, and he's like, oh, yeah, I get stuck with Randy over here, or whatever the guy's name is. And it's...
Yeah. And it's like, they have nothing really to do with the story. They didn't have to be in it. They are definitely a joke written for the sake that they wanted a joke in there. But because it's him, I think it was really funny. One that didn't hit for me and made my little heart hurt was when they were talking about killing the carrot looking guy.
Oh, yeah. Poor guy.
Yeah, they're like, just kill the one that looks like a carrot, make a point, make a statement, whatever. And he's like freaking out, and it's so sad.
Yeah. I think across the movie, more so than the other Guardians movies, for me, the comedy landed even outside of just Drax and Mantis, who I've always loved. But that being said, again, as we have said a couple times now, the darker moments just undercut some of it, or the comedy undercuts the darker moments, and it just seems a little lost and trying to fit in this fan service and wrap up these characters, but also keep it open-ended, and Will Poulter has to be here stumbling in and out of scenes. And so it just, I didn't necessarily like, I don't want to say I wanted to like this movie, because I'm, as I've said, not the biggest Guardians fan, and I haven't really enjoyed Marvel recently, but I had low expectations. It beat those expectations, but I don't think I can still say this is a, like, excellent Marvel movie. Yeah. Just a pretty good one, and I'm sure there are Guardians fans who will love this movie. There was a girl down our row who was absolutely sobbing when you think that Chris Pratt's gonna die, and then like cheering when he turns out to be alive. And to me, like, that's just so, I don't know, maybe because I don't like these characters or whatever as much as some people, it felt more like undercutting to me than like payoff or reward that he's alive. It just felt like, no, he probably should have died there. Like, it worked well enough to kill him in this scenario. Just let him be dead.
And that's not even just because he's Chris Pratt.
Yeah, I think there were a few moments where characters could have died and it would have felt earned for their character.
Yeah.
And like a good death where they were the hero in the moment and able to help their team and save people and do the best and prove that they're just being good. But in the end, they always, through Will Poulter or some other plot device, get out of it and are fine.
Yeah. Yeah, like he said, this movie changes between funny and dramatic as fast as that awful cut where they beat the crap out of those bad guys and then we're all of a sudden running down a hallway with no transition. Like...
Yeah, it's rough, Like, not often, but from time to time you're watching a movie and there'll just be a cut that doesn't quite work for you, whether it's a little bit jumpy or just a weird transition, or you're cutting away from a scene before you expect. And I kind of, I'll notice those things or be like, oh, I might have held that a little longer or cut this off even a little quicker, whatever. But when she turns to me and goes, that was a weird cut, it was janky and weird and out of place.
Yeah, if it comes from me, who unironically is obsessed with the Twilight movies to this day and thinks that they are very good, you know it's bad. Like, it has to be a bad cut.
Yeah, it really, I don't know, there's no continuity between it. It's the same characters, but it's suddenly, and it's not like it's 10 minutes later or anything. It's like 5 seconds later. It just cuts out all of them from leaning over punching somebody to standing up and walking towards camera.
Yeah, and that's kind of how it felt with, like, the drama and comedy in it.
Yeah.
It would be, like, literally slicing open baby raccoons, and then all of a sudden was, like, Drax and Mantis, you know, making some joke, and I was like, Excuse me, I was just throwing up. Why are we doing this?
Yeah. And speaking of walking towards camera, as I did just a little bit ago, the number of the classic Guardians of the Galaxy walking towards camera with classic rock song playing in background shots in this movie must be an all-time high. It's like every other scene, I feel like they're having some grand moment of the team walking towards camera.
It got to be Chris Pratt's second movie of the year where we got to hear No Sleep Till Brooklyn, though.
That is true. That is true. And I would say not used well in either movie. Better in this one, but it just once it started as they were walking towards camera and you're like, yeah, okay, hey, this works or whatever. And then it goes into this really long, heavily CGI one-take action scene that, I don't know, for me, it wasn't as impressive because it was all so heavily CGI as when they do those with more practical work, but it's kind of cool. I'm sure some people really like it and praise him, whatever. But No Sleep Till Brooklyn kind of just fades under the sound of the gunshots and the punching and stuff. And I don't know if like the song they didn't play it loud enough, or it just naturally has some kind of quieter dipping moments, but it didn't feel like an action song to me. It's like a hype up, we're about to go to action, but when the action starts, you need something a little punchier, in my opinion. And I just like partway through that scene, I was like, we've been watching this one shot for like a minute now, and No Sleep Till Brooklyn's still playing, and it just kind of doesn't add anything to this moment.
But on the bright side, at the end, they got to go into the 2000 songs, and I got to listen to Florence and the Machine. So, you know, that was a great part of the movie for me.
Yeah. One other thing I want to mention, there are these creatures they call the Hellspawn, which are basically similar to Rocket, but evil. And that they're just some creature, like a warthog or an octopus or whatever, taken and slightly augmented with machine parts and then asked to go do evil things. And these are also the CGI villains that we're supposed to be okay with all of our heroes brutally murdering, ripping heads off, blasting them in the face, kicking them really hard, doing all these terrible things to them in the cool action Marvel CGI villain way. But we're also getting these flashbacks of why we're supposed to care and feel bad for all of these creatures that are being tormented by the High Evolutionary.
Yeah. And when they explode, like, the little human creature morphic people's planets, there was this family that, like, helped them and we bonded with, and then they just let them die. They didn't even attempt to save anyone on this planet, even at all, not even once. And it's like, what kind of guardians are you?
Yeah, they very quickly are just, like, wrapped up in their own, we gotta save Rocket, get the ship over here, the planet's exploding. And it's like, yeah, the planet's exploding and killing all these people that we're supposed to have emotionally connected to through these backstories.
Yeah.
And it just isn't.
Yeah. And at the end, when they're exploding the ship and they're gonna kill all the children and whatever, and we're saving the day, you know, we've spent the whole time, like we said, getting to know these animals and seeing what they did with them and stuff. And then Rocket's the only one who wants to save the animals that are in cages that have been getting experimented on. And he finally convinces them to save them. And someone goes, I thought we were just sticking to the higher life forms. And Chris Pratt goes, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Like,
so once again, it's like, if you're not thinking too much about it or how that connects to the plot, you might laugh and move on and never think about it again. But when your whole crux of the emotional core of your movie is animals were tortured and brutalized and we need to save them, and then you have your villains being brutalized animals that we're supposed to laugh at getting beat up, and your main hero joking about the fact that they're lower life forms and didn't need to be saved.
Yeah, when his supposed best friend is one of them. Like,
yeah. Very strange. Kind of some weird choices there.
Yeah.
But that being said, I do want to reiterate, I enjoyed this more than I thought I would. The special effects are pretty good. I liked the idea of this one kind of base they go to that's grown from organic material. It's kind of gross, but at the same time, like, it works. It's not one of those gross things where I'm like, oh, that was just unnecessary. Like, it's kind of fun and different and a cool idea, and they use it well enough, I think. And there's plenty of great music and fun moments between characters, and it does, again, feature probably one of the best Marvel villains of recent years, if not all time. Really kind of struggling to think of ones that I would really put above him. Definitely in terms of performance, it's probably the best. I know lots of people like Thanos is the Marvel villain, and I do think he worked really, really well in his role. But
this one was just played so...
Yeah, there is, like, Thanos is a little bit like, he's the universe-ending threat, and he's dangerous to you as an individual, but he's just going to punch you so hard that you die. Whereas this guy is going to experiment on you and his twisted brain and psyche. There's no outside of, like, he wants to
be God.
He wants to play God and create perfection. There's no, like, rationale, whereas, like, with Thanos, he saw his planet destroyed and, oh, I'm trying to, right the balance of the universe and all this kind of stuff. So you can, like, not justify, but understand why he's crazy about this. But this villain is just a psychopath.
Yeah, he just has, like, OCD and wants to...
And narcissistic personality disorder and all this kind of stuff going on.
He doesn't want to play God, he wants to be God.
Yeah.
And to some people he is, because he's made entire planets.
Yeah. And I wish that villain was in more movies or had been given a bit more screen time, or that maybe was a little more involved in the flashbacks instead of so much time spent with the animals just saying we're friends over and over, because he was really excellent, and I hope that actor goes on to big things.
Yeah, you know what that otter's death scene was an exact replica of?
No.
Dobby's death scene in Harry Potter. When he goes, it's so nice to be with friends, and then dies. That's literally word for word the otter's death scene.
Yeah, it is very cliche.
Yeah, but it was rough.
I think that wraps up our thoughts. So what would you give this out of 10?
In terms of Marvel movies, because I don't like them, I would give it, like, a 7. In terms of my own movies, I'd give it maybe, like, a 5. Maybe a 6.
Yeah, I think in terms of the Marvel ranking, it's firmly middle to slightly above average for me. But just as a movie, I think I'll give it a 7, because it does work in large parts. But I think the constraints of being Marvel and having all these other things you've got to accomplish and fit within, it just kind of holds it back from being as good as it could have been.
Yep, I agree.
All right, those are our thoughts on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. On to Watcher.
Knock it off! What?
Just never noticed how black your eyes were.
They were replaced by my father as a method of torture.
He picked a pretty set.
All right. My choice for this week was Watcher, directed by Chloe Okuno. This came out last year. I heard a lot of people on TikTok say it was really good, and there wasn't any that I wanted to see in theaters this week, so I thought we'd finally visit this one. This stars Micah Monroe, Carl Glusman, and Bern Gorman. And yeah, it was about, a couple that moves to Bucharest for the husband gets a promotion, and they move there, and she doesn't know how to speak the language, so she spends most of her time just in her apartment, and it's kind of just like a psychological thriller of, is someone watching her, or is she just going a little bit crazy, stir crazy? Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very kind of like The Quiet Girl Last Week. It's a very simple movie, but it's a very effective movie, I think. It works really well at creating this sense of unease, and you can understand all of the characters. I think one of the strengths of this is it's not like the dismissive boyfriend trope or the policeman who doesn't listen to her trope, or like we clearly see these awful things happening in the world around her doesn't notice, or we clearly know this is all in her head and she's going crazy. You can totally understand why the police are helping as much as they do, but also like why they can't do any more than what they have. Like they're being as helpful as they can without like committing crimes themselves. And same with her boyfriend. He's trying to be supportive of her and understand her husband, trying to be supportive and understanding at the start, but after like a week or so of this, it's, you know, he's like, come on, we've checked with the police, we've gone and talked to the people that you're concerned about, we've gone to the grocery store and reviewed footage, we've done this, I've tried to help you with this, I understand that I'm at work all day and really long hours and I'm very sorry about this, but also like you're starting to drive me crazy because I come home and you're just miserable and paranoid at all times, and it's making my life hard now and makes me feel like maybe I shouldn't go to work or whatever. And so it's like, you know, because we're with her, we understand her side of it, but also when you think about it, if I was in that situation, you know, I'd want to believe you and I would try to help you as much, but at some point I'd have to be like, hey, maybe this isn't reality. Like, yeah. You know, you have just moved to a new country where you don't speak the language. You're basically just trapped in an apartment by yourself, and, you know, there's different customs, there's different...
Not to mention there is a killer that is actively murdering women in the city.
Yeah, and they walk by a crime scene, and so her paranoia, completely justified. The reaction to her paranoia, completely justified. And I think that's what makes this film work so well, is there's not the unbelievable annoying person or like the very cliche moments that you're like, all right, come on, by now someone would have caught this guy or he's gone too far. You know, he doesn't like, the watcher person's never like showing up in her apartment and like doing it like the spider guy. The spider, he's not like, you know, crossing any boundaries technically, but he also very much gives you an uneasy feeling. Yeah.
And like, yeah, like he was saying, there's not that stupid cliche where like the husband or boyfriend is just like, no, everything's fine. You know, the minute she's like, hey, this person, it looks like they're watching me all day, he's like, oh my gosh, you know, that's uncool. What can I do? You know, she has this cool neighbor, played by Madalena Anea, named Irina, who is just so fun and cute and accepting, and like immediately is like, oh, we can be friends, like let me help you, whatever. And she's so cute and I love her. But yeah, that's basically it. You know, girl and husband move to new city. She doesn't speak the language. She's stuck inside. She feels like the neighbor across the street is watching her, and then it's just kind of a are they or are they not throughout the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
Literally right up until the end.
Yeah, it's the final scene or two of the movie is when you finally find out what's actually going on and get the full context of the situation. But right up until then, every party is both in the right and the wrong.
Yeah.
For the entire runtime, and that's really impressive to do. It also helps this is about a 90-minute movie, so once again, it's not overstretching or trying to oversell its premise. It knows what it is, and it's also shot really well. It's a very good-looking movie and cleverly shot, and they use close-ups and wides and creepy holding on a shot of somebody who may or may not be following you kind of stuff, people in the background who you can't quite see because they're out of focus. Like, it does a really good job.
Yeah, and they frame a lot of the shots like as if we were the watcher, we're watching them, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, even when it's just them like at dinner with some of her husband's coworkers, they like pull out on this shot and like hold it of just like us watching them from a distance, or you know, the couple's like making out on the couch in the beginning and it like zooms out of the window, so you're just like staring in the window at them for like a really long time. It feels like it's very much 90 minutes of unease.
Yeah, but it also, I think, never really crosses that line of being too much. You know, there was never, it didn't get old in the sense that like a movie that I think did this, Jordan Peele's Us, is so heightenedly supposed to be scary and stressful that after about an hour of sitting with it, even me who hates stressful horror movies was like, okay, I'm kind of like, I've been at 11 for an hour straight and we haven't come down yet. I'm I'm kind of over this and I'm not scared anymore. Whereas this movie keeps you at like an 8 or a 9 for 90% of the runtime and just ekes up to a 10 or 11 only when it needs to, as opposed to just overusing, trying to be so intense. And it also never really crosses, which is a big fear of this watcher, stalker, guy follows girl potentially type film, of being very uncomfortable sexually. It doesn't cross those lines ever. It doesn't make you super like paranoid or uncomfortable or triggering. You know, there's
only that one kind of sex scene at the beginning where they're like, but it's the one where they're like making out on the couch. They're not actually,
and it's between a husband and wife, and it pulls back so it looks kind of like you're watching them, but it's not like he's, you know, there's no like video camera set up to watch her go to the bathroom, or like he's not coming in at night and watching her sleep. It's, you know, it's not that type of movie. It's just not. There might be a guy following this girl. She's in a country where she doesn't speak the language, and it's terrifying.
She might be following him. Like, you really don't know.
I think that's the other really strong part of this movie is, for her character, she then becomes hyper fixated because it's the only thing going on in her life really at the moment. And so she then starts to go, well, I've got to go find him. I've got to go see. Let's send the police over there. Oh, that didn't work. Let me go over here with this person, and oh, I see him there. Let me follow him and see where he goes. Does he work around here? Does he live around here? And so she ends up kind of stalking him, and they use that very smartly.
Yeah. There's only one scene that I find unnecessary in the movie, and we talk about this all the time, is a stupid dream sequence.
Yeah.
Unnecessary, and I get that they wanted it for like the jump scare or to get that kind of like action or violence that the movie is not having. Like, it doesn't have really any for most of the movie because it's like just a psychological thriller, you know? And so they added like a dream sequence thing to show even more why she's afraid or what she's thinking of when she's alone, and it just didn't need to be in there. Yeah,
it felt out of place in this movie. It felt very cheap and just the easy way out. We all know what's going on in her mind and what her fear is, but it's just, it honestly could have been like a producer note on the script being like, hey,
we need one good jump scare.
We haven't had any blood or jump scares. Give us some. You know, audiences are going to get bored by this point, and so, you know, you do it so that you can make the rest of the movie that you actually want to make. And yeah, a solution to that for me would be have that scene, but instead of it being a dream where we're thinking it might be reality, just have her kind of like zoned out in a chair or something, and then her husband gets home and she like freaks out and he goes, what's going on or whatever, and she has like a panic attack, and we're like, oh, it's literally any time she's just sitting there, this is what's running through her brain, because that's the whole point of this dream sequence. But again, that wouldn't give you the gore and the jump scare that,
or even like there is an active killer in the city, why not use that? Like, have someone who looks like her walking down the street and you think it's her from the back and someone grabs her or something, and then you find out it's just like another victim of this spider killer that looks like her, you know, something that would, you know, amplify her fear even more. But it just, it was very out of place.
Yep.
Okay, so that wraps up our spoiler-free review for this one. We're going to head into spoilers next, so if you don't want to hear those, make sure to stop right now. All right, leading into spoilers for Watcher. Like we said, this follows a girl and her husband who moved to Bucharest for his promotion that he receives at his job. She doesn't speak the language, so she spends the whole time basically cooped up in her apartment, and she starts to notice this like silhouette figure in the apartment across the street, and she kind of convinces herself that it's someone watching her. There is also an active serial killer out in the city that is murdering young women and slashing their throats and decapitating them. And, you know, she tries to distract herself, so she, you know, goes to a movie, and then a man comes and sits directly behind her when there's all this open space, and she can feel the breathing on her neck, and so she runs out, goes to the store, and there's a man there who's going down every aisle she's going down, but it's someone who, like, never meets her eye, which I also very much liked about the character for this man. He's played by Bern Gorman, and he is so awkward and anxious and doesn't make eye contact that it's like it does lead you to believe that this is all in her head for 99% of the movie.
Because even like those two moments in the movie theater, we never see the guy's face. It's just a guy comes and sits behind her, and we have seen a guy in the silhouette.
Yeah.
And then she goes across to the grocery store, and then there's a guy in the grocery store who seems like he might be following her, and so she then changes aisles and he changes aisles, and then she starts backing up and she knocks over pickles and then goes and hides in the like back room or whatever, and the guy just comes and looks at the pickles because, you know,
if you saw a broken jar on the ground, you would stop and look.
Yeah, if you heard it smash, you might go check out what happened in the next aisle over or whatever, and then she runs out. And so later they come back to like review the tape at the grocery store, and they're watching it, and yeah, there's the guy, and yeah, he is like kind of following, but it's also a store with like 3 aisles, so it's believable that he'd be in the same aisle.
Yeah, and she goes, look, he's looking right at me, and her husband's like, maybe he's just staring at a woman staring at him through the window, like.
Yeah. So there, like, again, it's not that he's not believing her. Like, he was like, yeah, let's go look at the tapes. Let's go right now. Like, I believe you. But he's also like, I don't want you to just jump to this immediate conclusion because, you know, not that it's a common thing, but there are murderers out there and there have been serial killers, and yet 99% of us will never come in contact with them. And so, yeah, you see a guy who might be acting a little shifty at a grocery store, and there is a murderer out there in a city the size of Bucharest, odds are they're not related. And I completely understand why he's trying to, like, make her feel comfortable in this new country.
Exactly, yeah. And, yeah, it gets to the point where she's so fixated on this man that she starts following him back, and he files a complaint as well with the police because he's like, this woman is following me to work, she's following me home, she's on the train when I'm on the train, she's staring at me in the window, she showed up with a random man and verbally assaulted my father. And it's like, oh my god, like, she might be crazy a little bit, you know?
Yeah. And so, like, the police officer, bless his heart, when she first calls, he's like, yeah, let me go over, like, I can at least just talk to him, see if anything strange is happening or whatever. All comes up looking relatively normal. And then the guy launches the complaint, the same officer comes and responds to her or whatever, and so he brings the guy over, he's like, hey, I just want to, like, clear things up. You both think the other's following you and being a little weird. New neighbors, let's just like clear the air, shake hands, agree that, you know, let's put this behind us. And to his credit, the man who may or may not be following her is like, yes, let's just, you know, I'm sorry, can we put this behind us? And so and he's so awkward and kind of adorable in a weird way that you're like, oh, maybe you should just,
the lack of eye contact.
Yeah, maybe you should just let him go.
And then when she had followed him to his job, He works as a janitor at this club that her neighbor works at. So, her neighbor's like, I'll keep an eye out for you. And she's another one who never, like, accuses her of being crazy. None of that. She's just like, yeah, we'll watch each other's backs. So she starts looking out for the neighbor as well. And one night she doesn't come home. And so she starts, the main character starts freaking out and trying to get into the apartment and whatever. And the landlord finally lets her in to kind of just like get her to stop screaming, because they don't speak English. They don't understand why she's terrified. So she just lets her in, and they go and look, and there's nothing there. But in the way that they filmed it with there's nothing there, that something's wrong.
Yeah, they very clearly are showing you a closet that is slightly open but entirely black inside, and then even I think shooting from in the closet back out, like its eyes looking out on the scene, and our main girl is like looking half over there like, is it there? But for not wanting it to be true, trying to convince herself, because they find a cat that knocked something over that had escaped from the neighbor a couple days earlier that we'd heard about. So Elvis, the cat. So it's like, oh yeah, okay, the cat got in here somehow and knocked something over. That's the sound I hear. And you don't want to then just like, with all your neighbors there, break into you've already had them like essentially break into the apartment. You don't want to then go through her closet in front of them. And so they leave, and then the landlady is talking to the husband. She's like, come on, like, we don't want problem people here. She's screaming, she's causing commotion and upsetting everybody else. Can you just talk to her? And so again, the husband's put in this situation where he's like not wanting to discredit her, but also like, hey, you're gonna get us kicked out of our apartment, and I don't want to deal with that for obvious reasons. And so they start to have kind of frayed tensions, and then he's also kind of stressed at work trying to get a promotion and whatever, and they have some friends over from work for dinner, and it gets kind of awkward, and she feels excluded because she doesn't speak Romanian. And then they go to a work event.
And with this work event, right before this, the supposed spider serial killer person has been caught as far as they know. So when they get to this work function, they're kind of making fun of it a little bit, because they're like, well, what are the odds that would happen? Like, oh, it seems to, whatever. And she's been studying the language up to this point, so she can kind of understand what they're saying.
Yeah, she's been doing it as a surprise for her husband. She wants to her dream is one day to be able to just casually say something to him or respond to him in Romanian, and him be like, wait, you understand? But it plays against her because he's, ill-advised, and it's not an excuse that he doesn't think she can understand him. You shouldn't talk like that. But they do kind of just joke and say, oh yeah, she thinks she has a stalker, but the guy got caught and whatever, blah, blah, blah. Kind of just teasing her about her paranoia.
Yeah, and he just wants to fit in with his coworkers and whatever.
The boss who's in charge of his promotion is standing 2 feet away from him and making the same joke. So he's trying to fit in. But again,
but she can hear, like, what is she going to do now that the spider's been caught? That's the only thing that she's had to focus on, basically.
Yeah.
And so it's like, obviously, like, he shouldn't have said that, but at the same time, like, that is all that she's been focused on this whole time. And so she gets upset and she storms out. She takes the train home alone at night. And lo and behold, who's on the train? The neighbor.
Yeah. And it starts out, they kind of just sit apart from each other, and they both like half look at the other and go, oh no, it's them. I don't, want to cause trouble or whatever.
And I think this is one of the most well shot, spooky little scenes that I've seen in a minute.
It's so tense, but so enjoyable.
Yeah, because he finally, like, the train stops because they think that they've, there's like an animal on the track or something. They have to stop for a minute. And he comes and sits by her, and he kind of just brings up what's been going on, all that kind of stuff. And at first it's very calm.
Yeah.
And he's just
and also, he's like, he knows she doesn't speak Romanian, that she's new, and there's been PA speakers and the train suddenly stopped, and he's just trying to like reassure her, kind of being neighborly and being like, hey, look, sometimes animals run out on the track. It happens. I'm sure they're chasing them right now. Like, it's all good. And she goes, well, how fast do they usually catch them? And he goes, well, it depends how fast you can run, or something like that. And it's like, ooh, wait, he might really be creepy.
Yeah, and he starts, bringing up what happened with them, and he's like, I've been thinking about it a lot, and I don't think I'm okay with just leaving this off with a handshake. Like, you were, a pretty young girl in the window. You were watching me. You waved at me. I thought we could be friends. And then you go and, like, bring the police into it, all this stuff.
Yeah, and he's got a father who's sick or whatever that he's taking care of. And he's like, and so my life, I'm a janitor, and I've got a dad who's sick, and I'm tired all the time. And a nice thing that I can just do to relax is look out my window and kind of people watch. And then one day,
you finally noticed me.
I thought I was maybe imagining you, because there's this beautiful young lady across the street and she waves at me, and that's the stuff you think about in your dreams. And so I waved back, but then suddenly you've got the police involved, and you've got this big strong man coming and busting down my door, which is just a guy that she meets and coerces into breaking down a door almost.
Yeah.
And he like verbally assaults the dad, the sick father, and whatever.
Yeah.
And he's just like, that's not okay. Like,
and
you've gone too far.
Yeah. He's like, so not only did I want a handshake, but I deserve an apology. And as he's saying that, it's like slowly panning down to show this bag sitting next to him, and it so very clearly has a woman's head inside the bag.
Yeah.
But it's like,
but again,
just not see-through enough that you can't quite tell. Like, you can see why she would think that. You can think that, but you could also see something else. It could be a rotisserie chicken.
Exactly.
I don't know.
I was half expecting him to reach into the bag and pull out just some trinket he has from the store, or like a pig's head that he was going to cook, and be like, hey, I'm making stew tonight. Do you want some?
Yeah.
Like, can we have a peace dinner? Or just that, like, this bag is her imagination, and that suddenly it's going to cut back to it, and it's just going to be like takeout containers.
Yeah.
And be very clearly not a head. But it never answers that question, and it's very much shot from her perspective. So it's hard to tell, is this what she's seeing, or is this reality?
Yeah, it's so will they, won't they, the whole movie.
Yeah. Like,
right up until the end. And so she finally gets back to her apartment, but she got off a stop earlier than him and ran. So, then that's what Everett said. The minute she got off the minute she got back to her apartment, he was like, if he is the bad guy, he would have gotten there first, because he stayed on the train. And so as she's like packing her stuff, because she's ready to go back to New York and doesn't want to be here anymore, like, you're wondering, is he gonna get her? And he doesn't go in her apartment, like, whatever. But she hears something next door, and so she goes into her neighbor's apartment again, because it's unlocked and open, and her neighbor's headless body is sitting in there, and the man comes out and he's like, I thought you saw me in the closet when I was here the first time. Like, I was so convinced that I would get caught that time. And yeah, he attacks her, slits her throat, whatever. You see her die on the floor, but she's
first he puts the bag over her head or whatever, which is like part of his signature killing thing or whatever.
We've been watching Criminal Minds, so he just learned signature.
And so she's like half suffocating under this bag or whatever, and then the boyfriend comes home, and he like hears him, or the husband comes home, and he hears him or whatever, and so then suddenly it's like he's enjoying this torture, and then he's like, oh no, I'm about to get caught, and he just slits her throat like it's nothing.
No, because when she falls down on the ground, he lays down on the ground with her for a while.
Well,
before the husband gets home.
No, because he slits her throat, and she's trying to knock on the wall to get her husband's attention, and then she can't get there or whatever, and he like pulls her up or something, and then she ends up falling on the floor.
Yeah, trying to get to a gun.
Trying to get to a gun that she knows Irina has, and she starts bleeding out, and then he just kind of lays on the floor and stares into her eyes for a minute.
And holds her hand while she's like bleeding out.
Yeah. And then he kind of just gets up and goes on his way.
But the husband sees the suitcase that is like starting to be packed but isn't fully packed, and he's freaking out because he's like, oh my god, like I made my wife mad enough that she's gonna leave the country and leave me. And so he takes a step out of the apartment.
Well, he calls try and call his wife, and he hears the phone go off in the next apartment, and he's like, oh, she's over at Irina's. Okay, let me go see if I can talk to her.
Yeah, so he steps out at the same time that the other guy is stepping out, and they both just stop and look at each other. And that's like, I think the movie should have ended there. Personally, I think that would have been such a great last shot of both of them just looking at each other and the husband being like, oh my God. Like, she was probably right.
Yeah. But they don't end there. I think they wanted not necessarily like a happier ending, but a more victorious ending for our main character. And she ends up somehow, despite losing 16 gallons of blood on the floor,
because she quit being an actress. She's an actress, babe.
Oh yeah, she mentions earlier in like a one-off line that she's an actor, and I even think I joked while we were watching this, like, oh, she's an actor, she's probably just pretending to be dead. And then lo and behold, she stands up and shoots him like 5 times.
I don't know how she stood up. I think it would have been better if she like was still laying on the floor and was able to shoot him and then died or something, but they had her get up and walk out of the apartment and just look at her husband like, Isn't
this interesting?
Almost as if I told you so.
Yeah, and man, I would feel awful if I was that husband, because again, like, from the outside, he didn't do much wrong.
He tried to be supportive.
But your wife is bleeding out from and her friend's headless in the next apartment because you didn't press this further when she wanted to.
Yeah.
And then the movie ends. Yeah. I really enjoyed this one.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. The more I think about the details, the more I like it, but as a movie overall, I don't think it's one I'd revisit.
Yeah. There's a movie, Hush, that we watched, which is by one of our favorites, Mike Flanagan. And it gave me similar vibes to that. Like, it's 90 minutes, it's contained, it's a small story.
And it's intense.
And it's intense from start to finish and doesn't overstay its welcome. But I think I would put this one above Hush.
Disagree. Hush is so good.
Because Hush, you know what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think the will they, won't they, stalk each other, murder each other vibe of this film works really well and makes it almost like a bit more rewatchable, and that I'd want to watch it again knowing 100% that he's the guy, and just kind of seeing some of the scenes play out and see if there are any more clues or something that I even ignored by being kind of in the dark, versus Hush, where it's very just, this is the story, she's trying to survive.
Yeah. Also, it is for sure him at the movie and then at the grocery store, because she looks at his shoes and then looks at his shoes.
Oh, yeah, his shoes are the same, but we don't see, like, his face or something. So, and they aren't, like...
And they don't really show his face up until he comes to file a complaint against her, and even still, he won't make eye contact with her. So we don't really see his full face up until the end, almost.
Yeah, till they're on the train together.
Yeah.
You really get a good look at him and his character.
Yeah, he's played very, very well.
Yeah.
Well, what would you rate it?
I think I'm going to give this one a 9 out of 10. It's enjoyable for the full 90 minutes. It's only 90 minutes. I keep saying that, but it is a big thing for me. I don't like really long movies or movies with an absurd long section that doesn't really relate to anything, and I think that just keeps happening more and more now, especially with streaming. So I like that this is a very focused, small, simple film. It also, as somebody who's just made like short films on absolute shoestring budgets, it's fun to watch movies that I feel like, oh, watching this, I could achieve that. Like, there's about 4 or 5 locations all around a city, so, you know, you just need a couple friends with apartments, you need permission to shoot on a train for 1 day, and you need access to a grocery store for a day. And that's about it. Everything else is pretty much just people in outfits in walking around a city or sitting in an apartment.
Yeah.
And yet it's a very effective movie.
Yeah.
And really enjoyable.
I think for this one, see, I would have given Hush a 9 out of 10 because I just love that movie. I think it's such a great rewatch. So this one's probably like an 8, maybe an 8.5 for me. It was really good.
Yeah, so that's a big recommendation from us on Watcher.
Yep.
There's this guy that lives across the street, and he's always looking over here.
Looking over here how?
Every time I look over there, he's just staring right at me.
All right, thanks for tuning into our podcast this week. Make sure you follow us on TikTok and Instagram at Nerd and Normie, and we put out new episodes for our podcast every Monday.
And whatever you're listening on, please give us a nice review. It really helps us out.
Thank you.